Hello everyone, my name is Laura Thompson and welcome to webinar 29. Brand new series, brand new vibe. Without further ado, let me start the screen share. Okay, so title of this week's webinar, Me, Yes You, Shedding the Imposter Syndrome. Taking more of an edutainment approach, Series 6 is designed to encourage, empower and embolden us all as we flex and stretch in how we work in 2020. What do we mean by edutainment? Well, almost delivering serious, heavy sessions through the Trojan horse of light-hearted, sassy, fresh, alternative, disruptive way of looking at things. What we're going to trial as well, just to kind of add up the amount of pep that we'd like to provide to people, is we're taking a slightly different approach. I'll explain more in a sec, but we're also going to follow this up with not only some written follow-up, but also Debs and I are going to be in conversation later, which we will record as an audio file based on the commentary and the questions that we've received around this really big topic that seems very on trend at the moment. So there are three ways in which we hope to provide support to all our dear friends, not only the visual through this webinar, but also the reading through the kind of the quiet response. And then for the people that like to listen to things in the background, we'll have a kind of confessions from a coach type audio podcast that will follow shortly. So, everything is starting to speed up. New season, new energy. How do I keep up? So as we experience the biggest shift in written history in how we work, the episodes in Series 6 are situation-based. And what we thought might be quite cool is to inspire it with the format of an agony aunt advice column. So rather than it being skills-based, as the previous series have been, it's much more situation-based, based really on a composite of the challenges and situations that people have been bringing to us. And so starting with a Dear Debbie letter each week, we're going to explore some real-life situations that can inhibit our potential, with the goal to guide us all to level up our confidence and success. And the letter that is going to be starting this week's is, Dear Debbie, I've recently become the manager, and although I'm not the youngest in the team, I have the least amount of experience. It's also a bit awkward because my work best friend and I went for the same role, and we were both expecting her to get it. I feel like I'm not good enough for the role and my promotion was a mistake. Head of my one-to-one, what shall I do? Yours, a friend in need. Okay, so dear friend in need, you're going to get a direct response via a letter from Debbie as wrap-up material for this particular webinar. But what I'd like to play as a role is to just whiz around your thinking a little bit, disrupt maybe some of those stuck beliefs that you might have about this situation, and in general, roll around this topic of imposter syndrome. So it seems to be a big thing. And in fact, the algorithms seem to be either attracted to us at the moment around this particular topic, or maybe it is becoming more of a topic. So whether it's Emma Watson, she who plays Hermione in the Harry Potter mega series, or whether it is a conversation you've had with a friend recently, certainly in our sphere, lots of people seem to be talking about this term imposter syndrome. So this 30-minute session is going to focus on this concept. A last-minute search for this term in Google generated about 5,890,000 results in under a second. It certainly has become a thing. So let's spend some time in this session. First of all, what is this imposter syndrome and why has it become such a thing? Let's challenge it and maybe create some alternative perspectives, because with that big old brain of ours rolling around thinking about things, we can either think about all the reasons why we can't do something or think about all the reasons why we could do something. So let's challenge it. And then let's have a look at three practical concepts that could help shed that old skin of maybe imposter syndrome and maximise your true potential. And we've had a lot of people recently asking us for book recommendations, because we all seem to be in kind of like a learning mode at the moment. And this book has blown me away. So thanks, Debs, for the recommendation. I couldn't stop reading the sample that gets sent once I bought it. And already I feel different as a result of having reading it. So if you're looking for a quick read that's easy to grasp, will just have you grasp right from the start. It's absolutely fantastic. Untamed. My understanding is that this has been Adele's book recently that she's raved about. So as an add-on from this particular topic we're going to cover, it's a really great book to really kind of kick you up into a new level. So let's just take a bit of a background view at the moment. For those of you who know me, I've been interested in this sort of emerging world of technology. And there's something called Moore's Law, which was thought of by a scientist back in the 60s and has pretty much tracked as truth since. And Moore's Law is the basic rule of thumb that each year we are doubling our processing power at half the cost. So year on year, we have more and more data that has been spun all around the world, constantly telling me more about how I should be feeling and what that means and what the consequences are. And if we were to put that in a graph, so back in the 1400s, we'd only just discovered the ability to print books to be read outside our own shoreline. And then here we are, woo, over the next, hundreds of years that follow, we just have this exponential, as it's called, growth in technology. And what does technology allow? That allows more communication, more messages, more and more telling us about what the world is thinking and how we should be thinking. So you may have heard this parable before, but it sure gets you realising the implications of exponential. So imagine a grain of rice and how tiny it is. So that grain of rice just seems really inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, really tiny. But there's an old Chinese, very wise story about a man who goes to the king, the emperor, and says, well, if I can do this, will you provide me a number of grains of sand that on a grain of rice, that on a chessboard, for each one of those squares doubles in volume? And the emperor says, well, of course, it's only a grain of rice, but without going through the maths of exponential rate of growth actually means on those 32 squares on a chessboard, it may start at 1, but the next one is 2, then 4, then 8, then 16, then 32. And by the time you get to the 32nd square, you're looking at 1.4 quintillion grains of rice, which bankrupted the kingdom. So it's a very quick visual understanding of, whoa, each year we are getting twice as many messages, potentially, at half the speed that we used to. What does that arrive at? We've got a lot of people telling us how to think at the moment. So part of being this fox, you'll notice my best friend's behind me, is being able to excavate through what is the stuff that's going to help me and what potentially is the stuff that is going to hinder me. Enter this concept of the imposter syndrome. So what is it? Why has it become such a thing? Let's just stream right back, right to the core of the definition. So what is a syndrome? Syndrome is a medical term, and it is a group of symptoms which happen at the same time and creates this characteristic combination. So it's not a disease that you catch. It's not a disorder, something's gone wrong. It is a happenstance of a series of conditions happening at the same time. Okay, cool. So I might be experiencing lots of things at the same time. It's a syndrome. Fine. What's an imposter? Well, an imposter is someone who pretends to be someone else with the goal to deceive, particularly for fraudulent gain. Okay, so an imposter is someone who knowingly goes out with a negative desire to trick and fool other people. Okay, so I want to go for this job, and it's asked for me to bring strategic vision to my planning. Okay. Oh, well, I just keep reading all these things about imposter syndrome at the moment. But when I stop and think about it, what is a syndrome? Well, it's just a set of feelings and observe things that happen at the same time. Okay. And what's an imposter? Am I knowingly looking to defraud an organisation by fooling them and deceiving them that I can be strategic? No, probably not. I probably just feel like I haven't been on the right training course. Okay. So where did this imposter syndrome come from? Well, Debs is going to talk more about this a little bit later on the audio, but our belief is that it was probably a term coined around the 70s, and it's where these two words were put together and then it became a thing. And the reason why it became such a thing is that, according to the statement around it, people suffering from imposter syndrome tend to have an increased risk of anxiety. So what do people who are anxious need? They need help and support. I'm interested about the word people here. Is it people or is it women? Is this a term that has actually been devised to potentially inhibit someone who is wanting to stretch and exceed the expectations that were set for them. And actually, before we kind of go down one particular avenue, maybe it is people, because maybe actually in a male perspective, this is what would typically be called an inferiority complex. But I haven't really heard much talk about inferiority complex recently. Maybe it's just a different way of viewing it. And actually what Debs will talk a little bit about later is how actually men and women manifest these sensations in really similar ways, but the language in which it's used might be slightly different. So a woman might come into a coaching environment saying, I think I've got imposter syndrome, can you help me? Whereas it might be by about session 3 or 4 that a chap might say, well, maybe it's this then. So there does seem to be something that happens when we label ourselves as having a thing. I had a scenario in my own life about 15 years ago. I had a period where there was a lot going on in my life, and I was very anxious in a wide open space on one particular day. And I wish I had never discovered the word agoraphobic. Because once I'd learnt that term, agoraphobic, that's it. It was stuck with me, and oh no, I can't go on that walk in the forest because I'm agoraphobic. And it became something that certainly wasn't an easy get out. It felt very stressful, but it was something that I sort of carried around that seemed to be bigger than who I was. So this session is an opportunity to think, am I potentially carrying around a label that sort of seems to fit a little bit, but before you know it, you're handcuffed in and it's starting to determine what you do next. So let's have a look at some things that maybe allow us to challenge what might actually be 2 random words that were put together that as a knock-on effect have impacted millions of people's sense of choice about whether they go for that work or that job title, etc. And why might be the benefit of someone or lots of chatter around imposter syndrome to sell help. So let's have a quick story time. I got asked a number of years ago to get involved in some 360-degree feedback with a board team. And so typically with 360-degree feedback, you're asking someone to give some feedback about the other 11 people. What would you say are this person's key strengths? What would you say are these person's key development areas? Lovely. And it suddenly dawned on me, oh my God. Half of the board team are saying that the other half need to be more strategic. And the other half are saying that the other half need to be more reflexive and dynamic in the moment. And I thought, hang on a minute here. Could it be that actually behaviours are just 2 sides of the same coin? Because the upside of being strategic is you can think in advance and put in some plans. Potentially there's a cost, there's a flip to being strategic, which is doggedly sticking onto a plan, not being reflexive in the moment. And all those people that were potentially cast aside as not being strategic, I bet they're ruddy good at firefighting and thinking under pressure in the moment. And it really started to open my eyes to this power of labelling ourselves as being good or bad. Therefore, am I an imposter going for this role, or am I valid for this role? And might it be worth just thinking about behaviours for a while? Because if only we were able to flip our flaws and realise that actually they are assets, they're just dressed up in a slightly different way. So if we have this yin and yang, which for many cultures is core in terms of achieving balance, having a bit of contrast. So on the one hand, you might be speaking to a friend who's saying to you, oh, I'm not very strategic or visionary, there's no way I can go for that director position. But on the other hand, I bet you're fantastic at firefighting and coming up with plans. Or I'm not very good at handling pressure, so I don't think, what was going on, I can't apply for a promotion now. I'm finding it tricky enough as it is. I'm not very good at handling pressure, and it's said on the job profile that this is a real high pressure role. Yeah, but I bet you're brilliant at planning and preparing. Or I'm not very good at making decisions. I bet you're fab at generating ideas. I'm not good at speaking in front of loads of people. I bet you're fantastic at being fully present in an important conversation. So sometimes these behaviours on one CV could be seen as a negative, dress it up in a different way, and that's precisely what the role is looking for. So if you or someone in your life is starting to write themselves off as, oh, there's no way I could go for that role, that's not me, then sometimes we can kind of roll into this cycle of thinking that we're all flaws, and actually each one of those behaviours will have a plus side, because it's all behaviours, two sides of the same coin. Maybe something else to have a think about is, well, I might not be 100% trained for this precise set of circumstances, but then who is right now? The whole world has got his L plates on. Forget about all the post-pandemic, current pandemic stuff. We've never had this amount of technological power. That is new for us all. There are now far more connected devices than there are humans on the planet. This is a brand new environment for all of us. No one has been on the precise training course that would have set them up for this year. So you're no better, worse, or further ahead than anyone else. Maybe what might be worth, though, is time to set your own personal development plan if you feel there are some stretch areas that might help. And this is something over the years that we found a really neat way to take someone or a team from place A to place B, so from current to ideal desired reality. So maybe this is an opportunity to think, all right, I'm feeling a bit wobbly about things at the moment. Rather than write it off as I'm suffering from imposter syndrome, maybe let's have a look at the actual fact as it is. Based on my attributes, what's one thing I could start? I think probably I need to practice more. What's one thing I could stop? Because I think I've grown out of that now. I think it's holding me back. And what's one thing that actually I think is probably serving me quite well at the moment? What's one thing I could continue? So start, stop, continue is a really neat way to just kickstart some energy if you feel like you're getting a little bit stuck. And sometimes when we're stuck, especially if we're gifted with some intelligence, that all that brain power can start unraveling inside. Maybe it's worthwhile having to think about learning curves. And I've been discussing this with a few teams recently, and it seemed to have just seemed to have worked actually as a way of looking at it. Because sometimes the imposter syndrome kicks in, I think, is if we're cracking on quicker with actioning than our usual preferred learning curve. So in terms of a learning curve, this is based on the Kolb learning cycle, and it's decades old, but it's a really handy way of looking at how does an individual stretch their comfort zone. Well, first off, when we're totally clueless about something, we're in this unconscious incompetent stage. So there we are, getting all ready for homeschool, going, fantastic, I've got the logos, all going to be wonderful. Totally clueless about what it was actually going to be like to balance all those things together. And this is what the psychologists would say is the unconscious incompetent stage. And you're either blissfully ignorant and you skip into it, or you're totally fearful about it because you're taking on the vibes of those around you. And this is the stage where I don't know what I don't know yet. Then we get into that conscious incompetence, which is Easter holidays. Oh my God. I now know what I don't know. I now know all the things that I am maybe not equipped with that I might need. And this can be quite a reality check. And it was where you realise you're either better off or worse off than maybe what you thought in stage one. So typically on a training course, if you're learning to be, for example, to become a first-time leader, this is like a couple of months in or a couple of weeks in when you realise all the things that you need to be thinking about. And then conscious competence is then when we're able to start practising, putting in some new routines and some new patterns. And if you imagine every time a thought goes round our brain, just like a train track, it gets embedded, embedded and embedded. So it then at some point becomes second nature, which is what the psychologists have called unconscious competence. I now just know it. Maybe 3 years ago, it would have taken you 3 weeks to prepare for each monthly board report. Now, actually, you can bang it out with a day's notice because you now just know how to put together a report or a financial overview or whatever it may be. In this unconscious competence, though, so typically this is where people would kind of go, right, this is the JFDI stage, just foxing, do it, right? So then you might think, okay, right, I'm just doing stuff now. And then you might find yourself starting to do things where you then look back and go, did I just foxing do that? Yes, you foxing did. Oh my gosh. Now at this point, I've got to catch my brain before it lets this, oh my goodness. And I've got two options then, you see. So when I've just kind of shocked myself of, have I just done a Facebook Live? Yes, you foxing did. Oh my gosh, I've now got two options. Oh no, that's not me. No, that's not me. And in fact, when I think about it, there were 3 things that went wrong. Right, write that off. Or do I catch myself in that moment of, actually, maybe I could do something next? Because it weren't perfect, but at least someone did a heart emoji. One person watched it. Right, so what am I going to do next? And what this then becomes is an infinite loop of stretching and growing rather than faltering and stopping. And the 4-stage learning curve, I think, is a lovely way to kind of catch ourselves, where actually maybe you're just cracking on with doing some actions that you are doing quicker than your normal preferred learning speed. And so maybe the thing that could help us now is to catch up with ourselves, catch up with that learning curve. If we were to close each day with some respectful reflection, maybe that's a way to actually train ourselves and achieve the certificate in our head that maybe there's no certificate out there. And if I were going to be really kind of matter of fact about it, if we're lucky, we get about 27,000 nightfalls in our lifetime. So wouldn't it be a shame if I let some of these days that were maybe not high performing slide and pretend they didn't happen, because we only get a minimal amount. So as we have the dawn to the dusk of each day, this is something that people have found really powerful as a way to grasp onto something positive to be able to make that day count. So let's say you've applied for 10 roles, no one's come back to you, you're feeling a little bit despondent, you're now starting to read all about imposter syndrome and that's starting to get inside your head. Could it be a really great way to fall asleep tonight doing a bit of reflection and having a bit of a daily gale, we call it. So everyone needs a gale in their life. So this is something that Deb's put together as a way to help people mark the time. So what am I grateful for? What have I accomplished amongst all of the things that feel like they haven't succeeded? What have I accomplished? What have I actually done? What I've improved upon? And what have I learned? And it's a fantastic way for all of us with our L plates on to keep coming up the next morning, bouncing on, and then stretching and growing. Maybe it's also worthwhile, dear friend in need, having a think about self-image, because there really is no one else in the world quite like you. That little fingerprint in order to be able to open up the phone, no one else in the world is able to unlock that stuff that you know, who you've seen, the conversations you have. There is no one in the world quite like you. So let's have a think about the power of self-image. And these might be things, something in particular, this concept of imposter syndrome, that might be worth a thought about. The first thing is, be the change you want to see in this world. If you feel like you are fearful about taking action because you're going to be judged, is that because actually secretly you're quite a judgy person yourself? Because the more we judge others, oh my gosh, can't believe they're going for that role, that's 3 levels up from the one that they left. Then the more we're carrying that perception of potentially others are going to judge us. Because if I'm thinking, who are they to do that? I'm also then carrying in my mind, they might be thinking, who am I to do this? So the more we judge others, the more judged we perceive us to be. And actually, sometimes we just need to give others a break in order to actually to give ourselves a break, because we can carry ourselves with these kind of judgments, but actually the way in which we view the world is often the way in which we view ourselves. Second thing maybe to have a think about to help carve and evolve out a new self-image is the power of what we read about. So this little race circuit here is a fascinating psychology experiment that always stuck with me. So imagine the scene. There are 20 people that have been that have volunteered to be involved in a reading and then a driving a car exercise. They're going to go out on a circuit. And as you drive on the circuit, your average speed is going to be clocked. So then you can see how much of a speedy or slower driver you may be. But the cohort was split into 2. So this is the test group. The first group had to read stuff all about risks, things going wrong, disasters happening, accounts of the Titanic. The second group had to read things about lottery winners, golfers getting holes in one, people taking risks and making an absolute fortune for themselves. So one half of the volunteers were to read things that made them look about bad luck, and the other half were to read things about made them look at good luck. And then guess what? When they went out and drove on the circuit, the people that had been reading all the bad news stuff about stuff that goes wrong drove slower. It wasn't about safety, it was about speed. Drove slower than the ones that had been reading all about lottery wins and good luck, etc. And the point the psychologists were looking to make is the virtual story we carry in our head has real world ramifications in the behaviours after. If I've just read for 2 hours in bed all about the imposter syndrome the night before my job interview, guess what virtual story I'm carrying around in my head? Why wouldn't I watch Erin Brockovich or something inspiring instead? Because that story in my head potentially is going to have some real world ramifications afterwards. So let's just catch ourselves before we start reading loads and loads about imposter syndrome. Sometimes the more we read about stuff, the more we assimilate it, because we're carrying it around in our head and basically we're advertising those set of behaviours. And the third thing to think about is, lest we forget that not every day is a given. If you want a reminder of how important it is to live the life that you know deep down you're able to, have a walk around a churchyard. Remind yourself of all those people that would have absolutely given their right arm to have had the chance to do the stuff that we could. So in these extraordinary times, lest we forget that we don't have to have had the certificate, the qualification, the tens of years behind us to be able to go for it and give something a chance. There are very few of us that have been on the right course to equip us as what we could this year. So the two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. Thank you, Debs, for the nudge on that. Wonderful quote in terms of as we're all finding our way. So the topic of this webinar was all about the imposter syndrome. It's a biggie, it's huge, and it seems to be catching on. The wonderful algorithms, of course, are doing their role precisely as they should, which is the more I start to read one article about it, it all pops up in other areas. But let's just be cautionary about the stuff that we absorb and the stuff we read about actually potentially could cause us to feel like that. So rather than a correlation, it could almost be causal. The more we read about it, the more we think it. So to a friend in need, imposter syndrome, may it be an opportunity to think about behaviours, self-image, and actually as a learning curve, and reading about things that actually make you feel good about yourself rather than stuff that makes you feel bad about yourself. Because could it be that actually there are a lot of people that are going to benefit from all of us feeling more anxious like this? Because if you feel anxious, then you need to buy some help, whether that's men, women, inferiority complex, imposter syndrome. Actually, most of the behaviours that we worry about in ourselves are the curse of the gift. So not being able to think visionary, strategically, but you're fantastic at tactical operational decision making. So maybe the imposter syndrome is something we use to back out from exiting our comfort zone. Maybe it's used to sell us some self-help. Either way, there is too much to do right now to spend days worrying about whether you can do it or not. To a friend in need, why don't you just go for it and worry about whether you can after? If ever we find ourselves thinking, but who am I to? Then maybe we can challenge that with, exactly, who are you not to? And maybe this is the time to evolve and level up. So the purpose of Series 6 is the chance to mix things up a little bit. We wanted to keep it nice and creative and bring a bit of light to some of these really heavy topics right now. The topic for webinar 29 has been about imposter syndrome. To a friend in need, you're going to get a direct letter back from dear Debbie. And we're also going to be in conversation with Debbie later, where based on the commentary we get throughout this, plus the messages we've had throughout the day, where we can really almost, we've kind of call it confessions from a coach, which is the wonderful privileged position that we have been in. So for many years, working with teams and individuals, helping them along their development, either through their career or through their personal development. And what that teaches you is that everyone feels these types of things at some point. It would be unnatural not to, because the point at which we're thinking, oh, can I, is probably precisely the point that we need to get through to then get to the other side and go, oh my gosh, I did that. Wow. So time to evolve and level up. Keep foxy, stay flexible, and we'll be attaching the audio file to this in some way so that for those of you who prefer to listen to stuff, you can then listen to that in your own time as well, in conversation with Debs. So look after yourself, and we'll see you at the next webinar.